Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're still waiting for more people to arrive, but we're going to get started and just in the interest of time. So welcome. My name is Brandon Searle. I'm the Innovation Director here at the Offsite Construction Research Center. And this is the first of our 2025-26 webinar series on transforming construction. So thank you everyone for joining. So quick overview, if you didn't attend last year, this will be new to you, but for those of you who did attend, it's same stuff as last year. So quick welcome and intro to the Offsite Construction Research Center, and then Building Transformations, who is partnering with us to deliver the webinars. Introduction to our speaker, presentation by Aaron, our speaker today, and then Q&A and discussion and wrap up. Just a quick overview of the Microsoft Teams webinar. So during the presentation, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A feature you can see in the top of the toolbar there. You can submit your questions at any time. We'll do our best to get to them during the moderated discussion. If you're having other issues or if you accidentally submit your questions through the chat, we'll bring those over to the questions and make sure we get to them. And for the ones that we don't get to, we try to answer them afterwards and email that out to the registrants. If you have difficulty hearing, just check your audio settings. If you're having any other problems, just mention it in the Q&A feature. My colleague Roshni's keeping an eye on that and might be able to help you out. And this is just a reminder that all sessions are also being recorded and they're going to be made available on our website. So all our sessions from last year, as well as the blogs from our webinars, are all available on the UNB Offsite Construction Research Center website. And also Building Transformations posts them on their YouTube page. So quickly, just a quick note about the University of New Brunswick. So we're located here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and it was founded in 1785 and is home to Canada's first engineering, forestry, and computer science programs, with engineering courses first being offered in 1854. Since then, UNB has grown significantly with campuses in both Fredericton and St. John, New Brunswick, over 25 leading research institutes and centers, and over 25 world-class research chairs. In addition to the research success, UNB has been very successful in helping foster a startup community on the East Coast. And this stat's a bit dated, but it has seen over 100 startup companies come out of UNB since 2013 and was even named Canada's most entrepreneurial university by Startup Canada in 2014. Just a bit about the Research Center. So we're started in 2018, and over that time, we went through quite a significant growth. Now we're up to 12 staff members, several professors and faculty members involved, and I've collaborated with over 70 companies across the country. In 2022, we went through a new strategic plan where we focused on industry relevance, collaboration, excellence, and integrity. Our full strategic plan is available on our website if you want to check it out. And then just quickly on our research areas and expertise, many folks on the call are familiar with us, so you'd see this already, but where we've focused historically and where we're continuing to focus on is in process and productivity improvement, implementation of digital technologies that really transition from traditional construction to prefab or working in factories. Recently focused more on structures and building science, and we've recently opened our new high-performance buildings research lab here in Fredericton, and then benchmarking innovation in construction. And some folks would have seen a roadmap that we wrote earlier this year that was funded by the federal government, focused on transforming the Canadian construction industry. So just quickly about Building Transformations, who's partnered with us in this webinar series. So Building Transformations drives the building and construction industry forward. Its mission is to foster a community that is committed to knowledge sharing and advancing technology and innovation in the built environment. BT has many programs to serve members, including events, in-person and online, certification, think tanks, and so on. So you can check those all out on their website. Just a few snapshots about their members and audience. So over 1,800 members. There's just a breakdown of the members, and you can see a lot of it is majority private sector, but they're roughly 40% government, academic, and research. If you want to learn more about the membership, you can check out their website. And then there's a couple other things about their program. So there's an Innovation Spotlight publication. They're all available digitally online. Encourage you to check them out as well. Events coming up in 2026. Through the pandemic, Building Transformations wasn't doing as many events, but now they're really ramping up. And over the last couple of years, have hosted their first events south of the border and are planning to go back to Phoenix in April. And there's also events happening in Calgary, Montreal, Halifax, and Toronto, with a few more, I think, being planned right now. If you're interested in learning more about the Phoenix Industry Summit, feel free to check out that QR code and sign up for the newsletters. And just quickly, Building Transformations wants us to thank their mission partners, so the strategic partner PCL, Gold, Bentley, Global E-Training, and Hexagon, and corporate BSI, Bird Construction, Can-Am, McGill, Plan Group, Pinnacle Infotech, and Pomerleau. And lastly, the OCRC wants to thank our partners who are supporting the webinar series, in particular our founding partner, OSCO Construction Group, as well as Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. And lastly, our marketing partners who are all listed here. I won't go through them all, but if you're a member of these organizations, you'll probably get emails about our research center and what we're doing. So we appreciate them helping us promote. All right, so now I'm going to welcome Aaron Holm. Aaron is a founding partner of Helix, the first housing innovation agency harnessing AI, deep industry expertise, and strategic networks to help customers reduce the cost of housing development. With over 20 years of entrepreneurial and executive experience spanning technology and industrialized construction, Helix is pioneering a new agency model that accelerates housing innovation through strategic advisory services and AI-powered marketplace and orchestration solutions. Aaron brings over a decade of specialized expertise in industrialized housing production to Helix's groundbreaking approach. Prior to co-founding the agency, he founded and served as CEO of Blockable, a modular housing company, and held senior product leadership roles at Amazon, where he helped launch 2 retail concepts, Amazon Go's cashierless stores and Amazon Books, the company's first physical retail venture. His technology leadership portfolio also includes serving as Chief Product Officer and CTO at Mylio and Industrial Color. A University of Toronto graduate, Aaron combines technical depth with operational excellence honed through leading both startups and corporate initiatives across enterprise software, consumer technology, housing development, and manufacturing. At Helix, he channels this multidisciplinary expertise into building an innovation agency that transforms how housing gets built, connecting innovative builders, progressive developers, government agencies, and investors through a unique blend of industry knowledge, strategic relationships, and cutting-edge AI technology. Aaron's going to speak to us today about a systems approach to Canada's housing crisis, lessons learned from California, and opportunities for Canada. Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. If you want to go ahead and share your screen.
I will. Okay. Let's see here. All right. Let me know if you're able to see the screen.
It's black right now, but I'll give you a thumbs up. I think some folks see it. Maybe it's just me that doesn't.
Well, let me share it again.
Okay.
How's that?
Yep.
And then let's see if we go full screen, if life is still peachy.
Yeah, we're good.
It is.
Perfect.
Okay, good. All right. Thanks. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. I love, maybe more than is healthy, to talk about this subject. And I also love the opportunity to reflect specifically on the moment in time that we're in Canada. I grew up in Toronto. I've been in the States for a while now, building different businesses, and I couldn't help but notice when some of the recent announcements started to come out that things seemed familiar to a moment in time that we'd seen, on the West Coast here in the States, and putting a bunch of subsidy into the market. So I'm going to frame the overall presentation with a little bit of theory, And some of it comes back to the recent Nobel Prize winners, one of whom was a Canadian, and some of the work that they had done in looking at creative destruction and how economies use innovation to move forward. So a great quote: "We must uphold the mechanisms that underlie creative destruction, so that we do not fall back into stagnation." This is the anchor of the presentation. So I'm going to poke the bear a little bit with today's presentation, and I hope no one minds. So the housing crisis is accelerating in severity. I think we can all agree that this is a really core issue. One of the numbers that I pay most attention to is the price to income ratios. And so if you look at what's been happening, particularly over the last decade, price to income ratios are kind of out of control. And this is leading to somewhat of an existential crisis in the housing market, where we're basically at a stop point in building. Like where I live in Seattle, essentially there are no new multifamily buildings being permitted or built because the economics don't work and they can't be financed. And so if you look at the difference between 2010 and 2024, we've gone from basically a 4 to 5x on price to income to 10 to 14x. And that's a relatively short period of time if you look historically. So looking back on some of my history, I grew up in Toronto in the late 70s. I had a single mother. We didn't have a lot of money, but we still lived in Little Italy in, downtown Toronto. And the price, her housing cost burden at that point was about 21% of her income. So $350 a month for a one-bedroom apartment that we shared just north of College in Little Italy. Now, for a similar median income, her burden would be 64%. So a working class Toronto family, we spent 21% in the late 70s. Now it would be 64%. And one of the things we attribute this to, which I'll get into a bit, is the Baumol's cost disease. So what I want to frame up today is basically it's time to accept reality a little bit in the housing market. There are elements going on, particularly with subsidies and what we do with subsidies, that are not functioning and not working. And there's basically no path for them to work. They're not going to change. Nothing about those dynamics are going to change. If you look at what happened in the California market over the last decade, they spent about $25 billion on subsidies, and I'll get into where some of those subsidies went. And what it led to was a significant spike in costs, a significant cost increase to the tune of about 70%. Canada is now at the threshold, particularly with the Build Canada Homes program, of investing a lot of money into the market. And the question is, what's that money going to be used for, and how's it going to change the dynamics and the path that we're on? And this is the reality that I want to frame for the presentation. Nothing gets built without financing. So new housing just simply doesn't happen without financing. Housing that can't be financed by private debt and equity must be subsidized. So if you look at the spread between construction cost inflation, development cost inflation, and income growth, between those two lines is essentially subsidy. So continued cost escalation makes it difficult or impossible to finance new housing development. And most of the new housing targets are fantasies. I've watched, California, Washington State, Canada all announce housing targets, which are sort of mathematically deduced numbers that indicate, the amount of housing that needs to be created in order to bring various economic factors back into line, and they basically never happen. And without system reform and cost reduction, all of the housing targets are fantasies. And I'll dial this back to what's happening where I live now, just outside Seattle. In King County, they've announced aggressive housing targets for the last decade, and they fall further and further behind, which basically leads to a compound problem. And this is the article that came out this week in the Seattle Times, which basically said that there was a goal of 177,698 units to build, and we built and we're on track to build 70,000. So the shortfall is bigger than this. We're not building by an order of magnitude, which means the shortfall is greater than the units built. So at that point, you ask, well, what was the goal based on? Was the goal based on some type of new thing that was going to come along, and suddenly the amount of housing that we could produce would change? Surely the interest rates had an effect. But overall, I would say that the dynamics that are in place that are driving cost escalation are not transitory. They're not temporary, because there's simply too many core factors that lead to the cost escalation. So a little bit about Helix. As Brandon mentioned, we use our expertise, networks, and AI to reduce the cost of housing development for our customers. I love what we do. We work on really cool projects that are at the core imagining new housing systems that are more functional, efficient, and integrated. I believe that we're moving into a phase of systems integration that's going to unlock AI and change the housing delivery system. And that's what we're very excited about. A couple examples. Solar Impact Model Z is probably the largest affordable housing developer in LA. They've built a modular factory called Model Z, and we basically worked a technology strategy together for them to integrate their development, construction, modular manufacturing processes all into one comprehensive process. The incredible thing about them is they've focused on costs so relentlessly that they build affordable housing in LA without government subsidy, so without LIHTC money, which is a big deal. Everybody else, basically, the only way that they can build affordable housing for Section 8 renters is to use LIHTC subsidies. These guys have no subsidies, no LIHTC subsidies in their capital stack. Earth Forest Technologies is a forest management company that has developed new technology that allows them to clear debris and trees from the forest in a very precise way, which basically gives them a lot of fiber production. And now they're taking that fiber production into a housing development strategy, housing production strategy modular using mass timber. So we're working with them to implement that design and implement that strategy. And then Row Homes is a modular builder out of Vancouver who builds laneway homes, quadplexes, et cetera, utilizing some of Vancouver's programs that allow you to build by right on smaller lots. And we worked with them to develop a strategy that basically matched their building program to architectural pre-approved standardized designs. Because they had the architects with the standardized designs, but then you still had the issue of, well, how do you build these things? So they've come from the other side and said, well, we know how to build these. Here's the cost, here's the schedule, here's the BOM. And now we can partner with architects to create fully integrated solutions, which really simplify the model. So just some examples of some really cool projects we're working on. Our model basically says that there's four sides to the problem. You've got a need for product innovation, which means new products that can be manufactured. They plug into a regulatory environment that needs to, be very seamlessly integrated because you need to build within the regulatory framework. Those are developed and built in partnership or in some cases, or vertically integrated with a development process that essentially knows how to take down the land and assemble a financing stack to build projects. And then underneath it, of course, you have investment. And that's a mix typically of debt and equity that allows a project to be built because it can be financed, which is the only stuff that gets built. So a return to housing abundance, what would it take? I'm going to walk through a framework, which is essentially how we look at it, that has three parts in this narrative. One is, what's going on with housing costs? And there's a mix of theory and history in there that I'll walk through. Second is, what are some of the recipes and challenges for actually reducing costs? And then third, if you do reduce costs, how does that shift the market, and how can we start to think about a model of abundance instead of just perpetual scarcity, which has been the housing model for the past decade? So what if we were to imagine a 35% cost reduction in housing in 10 years? Right now, every model that I've seen is basically phoning in endless cost escalation, and it's just not going to work. So I think we need to look at it the other way and say, well, how do we drive down the cost? How's that going to work? What are the mechanisms that we can use? What can we invest in? Who should invest? Where should the investment come from? How does the system work? And if we set a 35% housing cost target, other industries have done it. And so I'm saying that this is something that's entirely viable. So a little bit of theory. Baumol's cost disease. I was talking with my friend Joel Blitt, who I played volleyball with at University of Toronto. He's a professor at the University of Waterloo, and he was brought back Baumol's cost disease to my attention. And it basically says, services are expensive and products are cheaper. And so that's, and it's proven out over time if you look at the cost curves for these various different parts of the economy. I mean, service-based businesses are expensive, and there's reasons for that. Manufacturing can become very productive. So productivity in manufacturing is one of the most big success stories in the economy. When you have stagnant productivity, which happens in services, costs go up. And so you have an inevitable rise in costs for service-based businesses just based on the dynamics. So what does that mean in housing? Well, if you look at the difference between the manufacturing sector and the construction sector for general productivity, you have a big gap. And in that gap is where all the costs arise. So in the gap, not all the costs, a lot of the costs arise through that gap. And if you look at that gap from 1970, you have a particularly widening gap where manufacturing has really kicked in and developed a lot of productivity to the economy, whereas construction has staggered. Coupling that with some of the really important concepts that came out of the Nobel Prize this year in economics. And I'm going to read this quote because I think it's really powerful and it touches on a lot of how the money flows and how subsidies flow, particularly in housing, because you have an affordable housing industry, and the affordable housing industry is financed using subsidy. That's typically where the subsidies, absent some theory and priority of innovation, the subsidies typically go to subsidize the existing structures. So in some societies, people who are part of status quo and very successful based on previous technologies gain political power and influence and are able to arrange things so that it's very difficult for new technologies to displace them. That helps to protect their interests, but it also inhibits economic growth and stops new technologies from being implemented. I just want to pause for a moment there and just really recognize how powerful this statement is, because this leads to choices that need to be made at the political level and the policy level. How are we going to apply subsidies and incentives into the market using public dollars? Can we acknowledge that we are in a phase of creative destruction? There's a necessary phase of creative destruction because the current systems are not working. The current housing delivery system is not working. It is not delivering homes. It cannot be financed. We need to find new ways. That's the acceptance part, accepting reality. The second part is there a pathway to productivity transformation? And I believe that there is. And we at Helix are all in on the fact that there is a pathway. So the Canadian housing market, just going into a little bit of history, was created mainly in a period of abundance after the Second World War. It was an agreement between, finance, that housing was necessary, and that there would be government, involvement in the financing of housing, basically to provide, low interest debt and different ways of incentivizing housing development. And it created an extended phase of stability. We won't get into, who benefited or who didn't benefit from that stability and equity and household earnings, but for now, that's the base assumption. So you have a stable, a lot of stability between, post World War II and more or less, into the early 2000s. There was a general connection between price and income. And then it just kind of went out of control. And here's where we're into an affordability crisis, where as you start to get into, after 2010 and you have the Great Recession and you have a lot of labor leaving the market and you have just a lot of dynamics kicking in place, you have a price to income ratio that starts to get out of control. That's mapped to the productivity delta between manufacturing and construction. They're not unrelated. So you have basically a cost crisis, a number of different inputs to a cost crisis, another one being the productivity gap between manufacturing and construction. If you look at it next to each other, I mean, if we think manufacturing productivity is important, which we do, 900% manufacturing productivity growth versus minus 30% in construction. And it's not just the manufacturing side of it, it's also the delivery system and the supply chain. So how do you get something from a factory to the market is just as important as how efficiently something moves through the factory. So the result of it, though, has been for a major sector, housing development has not seen the kind of innovation and the kind of cost reduction that we've seen in other industries. So you can look at that as a failure or an opportunity. We view it as an opportunity. This moment in time gives us a pretty clear view of what needs to be done. So what are some of the challenges and the recipes? Well, one of the primary challenges is you can't just take housing construction and move it into a factory. It doesn't really work that way. Construction is a different process than manufacturing. And, the market in housing doesn't typically buy manufactured products beyond supply chain elements, things like windows and doors and cladding and things like that you can manufacture. But you have four key issues. One is, the demand side fragmentation, which we'll get through into the next slide. Two is the soft costs are still very service oriented. So the soft costs, all the all the non-hard costs of building housing, the permitting, regulations, architecture, engineering, the per project aspect of housing development, which in the end ends up on a specific site that has specific characteristics. So you're always going to be working with different variables because you have, site-specific conditions. The question is, how much of the overall budget should be affected by that? The regulatory barriers over the last couple of decades have created significant costs, and there's very little systems integration, which is one of the key issues with housing development, which is the technology integration between the different players in the overall supply chain to go from an entitled parcel to certificate of occupancy ready homes is not connected digitally, not connected from a software perspective. So that's an issue. The second is, the housing development world and builders is primarily small and medium-sized businesses. So these are not giant, groups that are, it's not Apple working with Foxconn to create the next iPhone. That's not how the distribution chain works in housing. It's not, Toyota making the next RAV4. You can deliver it through roads and everybody's got people have parking lots and they have gas and they have all these different elements you need. It's not, the industry's not at that level. Connecting the dots between builders and modular or prefab innovation is challenging because there's a lot of fragmentation. And so these are just some numbers around that. But just as an assumption, if you think of those two dynamics together, you can't just move construction indoors because the efficiencies aren't there. And then when you have a manufacturing process, selling that and integrating that into a development and build process that's very fragmented has its challenges. So if we look at investment, this is now the opportunity side of it, we can see that there's not really been a lot of investment in innovating housing. If you look at other sectors, and these are Canadian numbers, manufacturing, supply chain, healthcare, microchips, there's been significant public investment in innovation, creating new models, new delivery mechanisms, new manufacturing processes, new science, new deep tech. All of those have received significant public dollars. Housing has not been viewed as a sector that has the same dynamics, though it does. So the housing money typically doesn't get invested into innovation. It doesn't get invested into new technology, new systems, et cetera. So the subsidies that go into housing tend to underwrite the existing delivery model, which as we've seen is not working. The nature of the subsidies is different. In other sectors, you typically start with the question of how do we transform the production system? Right? What's the AI investment going to be in healthcare over the coming? We're looking at 22x, so 22 times is the projected growth of investment in healthcare AI. In housing AI, it's 3.5 to 6x. That's nothing relative to other industries. So if you look at the investment level, we're kind of getting what we should expect because we're not investing. We're not investing in transformation. We're not investing in innovation. And so we're not really getting the results. It's really a cause and effect issue. The housing question typically starts with, how do we subsidize today's costs? So for housing, we subsidize consumption, assuming continued cost escalation. So some lessons from California, and I've been deeply involved in the California market for about a decade now. Built projects in California, worked with a lot of folks who are involved at the policy level, innovators, housing development, et cetera. And what we've seen almost uniformly and using different mechanisms has been a pretty direct relationship between public subsidy and cost escalation. So the most stark of those is probably the Triple H bond, which was for good intention put into place in LA as a way to try to alleviate the affordability crisis and the homelessness crisis. So two very related issues, homelessness and affordable housing. So they invested initially, it was a $1.2 billion bond, and then they drove that up to $1.8 billion bond. And over the course of the program, costs went from $350 a door to almost $600,000 a door. That's for subsidized projects. The market rate housing was still more competitive, but costs still went up because overall cost to build in the market went up because it had been somewhat flooded with subsidy money, right? So take that that number, that sort of $600,000 a door number, that's to build an affordable unit of housing in LA. That number's higher than the cost to build a market rate unit. And the folks that we're working with at Sola have got their number down below $300,000 a door. So they're down at about $280,000 a door because the cost of the unit into their development economics is the key factor. And so their focus in R&D and investment on innovation is all focused on driving down cost. We've seen similar things in San Francisco and in San Jose. As price to earnings ratios have spiked and as the number of permits for new jobs have gone out of line, severe housing crunches in each one of these areas, and subsidies just haven't fixed the problem. And if anything, they've made the problem worse. So you see this direct relationship between, the amount of subsidy that's pumped into a market and the cost escalation. So California, 25 billion plus put into the market and costs doubled. And we didn't get a lot of new housing. So how do we reduce costs? Well, there's a formula. If you look at other industries, container shipping, and I'm not going to go into all the details, these slides will be made available, but there's a formula to this. And the formula that we've extracted it's a mix of product innovation, systems orchestration, regulatory reform, and then market commitment. And we've seen this play out in industry after industry, pharmaceuticals, aviation, aerospace. There's a product innovation that says we can build something that's more efficient to build and is more cost effective, and we can build lots of them because we're going to manufacture. Then there's a systems orchestration, which says, how do I get this product into the consumer's hand? Because it's not just, consumer doesn't go to a factory and buy the end product. It goes through a distribution system, a delivery system. And in housing, that includes developers, builders, financiers, a whole mix of different contractors that work to get something to the finish line. So the systems orchestration is important. Regulatory framework needs to be aligned with the delivery of the innovative products. So the regulatory framework needs to work in concert with the product innovation and the newly orchestrated system. And then at the end, you need a market commitment, which basically says, okay, if we know that consumers spend, and we've seen this in energy grids, this is how it typically works. If we know that consumers pay X for power or for housing or anything they buy, then we can say, if the product innovation can get the price to here, and if we can get capacity up to the point where it can deliver a certain number of units, then investors, the public, et cetera, can commit to essentially offtake, saying over a 3-year, 7-year period, we'll buy 10,000, 20,000, assuming that those numbers are right. And with those commitments, now you can finance the capacity that you need to bring to the market in order to be able to produce, the thing that you're trying to build. It doesn't work if any one of these pieces is not there. And you can see this across each of these different examples that I'm going to cite. So container shipping, 90% cost reduction, 89% cost reduction in solar panels. EV batteries, similar. You see all these things all have to work together. So the pattern's universal. All major industrial cost reductions follow this 4-component framework. The integration is vital. Housing has all the necessary building blocks. All the mechanisms exist. We just need to organize them and orchestrate them. So housing compared to these other industries, if you look through the same period, and then we just take Canada and California as an example, we haven't seen any of the kinds of cost reductions that we've seen in other industries, and this has been demonstrated time and time again. So we've seen manufacturing learning curves, right, which is essentially this idea that if when Ford moved the Model T into an assembly process, it wasn't the factory building their initial spec that drove the costs down. It was the learning effects of manufacturing, meaning they stopped changing the specs on the product and they just got really, really efficient at building it. So they learned these things called manufacturing learning effects are essentially an S curve where you start with a certain product, you get really, really good at building it, you plummet the price, and then it kind of levels out. And then you have product innovation that changes products. But that's what made the difference with automotive at the beginning. It was the learning effects. So we look at AI and assume that AI is going to play a key role in orchestration, which we believe it is, connecting the different components of the industry and creating efficiencies that deliver better costs. Our projected investment in AI in housing is insufficient. So looking across other industries that we deem to be important to the economy, key areas of innovation that either are important for quality of life or for economic impact or different reasons, there is a general understanding that investment in AI over the coming decades is going to be a very important thing to do. And we do not currently look at housing as a destination for this investment money. And I think in the same way that we've seen what happens with not paying attention to productivity curves, we're at the beginning of not paying attention to an AI investment gap. And so this is an area where I think there needs to be significant investment, both privately, so private groups that are involved in innovation in the housing market, and I would say product innovators, manufacturers, supply chain, et cetera. AI is going to play a critical role in orchestrating the different aspects of housing delivery. So what's the opportunity? If we take all of these assumptions and these facts that we've put out there, and we ask, okay, well, what does this all mean? How's this going to create a different scenario? How's this going to heal the housing market, the housing delivery system? How do we create a situation where we move back to the notion of abundance, forward to the notion of abundance, and away from this scarcity mentality that we've been in now for close to a decade? So there's a few different pillars, and I think we've identified them along the way. One is product innovation. We need to develop products that can be manufactured and that flow into housing production systems. So we need to upfront invest in early stage ideas that are going to lead to viable housing products that can be manufactured. And then we need to invest in growth stage ideas for products that have reached product market fit and can now scale. We need to be putting investment into those, and that's public and private dollars need to go into that. Regulatory reform to streamline the flow of these innovative products that are manufactured into the market so that it's easy for developers and it's easy for builders to adopt these products. It's actually easier for them to build with them than it is conventionally because they're pre-approved, they're standardized, they're understood, there's performance-based review. There needs to be financial support. So supporting these early stage innovations, supporting AI innovation and growth. We need AI systems orchestration, which means connecting all the different players that are in the housing delivery system using AI to create efficiencies and reduce costs and time. And then everybody that's involved in the system needs to be reporting on, how they're doing and whether they're making progress. We kind of see them as all connected. And then they all flow into this notion of sort of market commitment agreements, which we see as being agreements between offtake, whether it's public and private investment, and then product innovators and factories so that they can stabilize their lines and provide their products to developers and builders for multi-year agreements. Developers and builders have access to sites. They understand the land. They understand their market dynamics. And we need to integrate the flow of product from innovative product builders into the development and build process, and then have that backstopped by market commitment agreements, which provide multi-year stability both on the price and on the investment side. So if we do all these things, design for manufacturing, scale production infrastructure, implement and connect AI orchestration, essentially a lot of good things happen. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because these slides will be available. But the investment must enable the complete system from design innovation to product infrastructure. Investing, the idea of just investing in a factory is misguided. So factories plugged into the existing housing delivery system really have a struggle because there's a mismatch between the incentives of a factory, which are meant to provide steady production that best utilizes the fixed costs, both labor and overhead equipment, et cetera, of a factory. We want steady production into a market that historically has not worked that way. The way to smooth that out is long-term agreements. So market commitment agreements. So what is a market commitment agreement? It has 4 critical commitments. One is production capacity, then land and development, financing, and pre-approved designs. Those are the elements that enable continuous production, learning curves, economies of scale, lower finance costs, workforce development, supply chain optimization. This is the promise of advanced market commitment agreements. And then you get essentially a 3 to 5x productivity improvement potential. This potential is worth going after. It's worth investing in these directions. They don't. One of the issues with previous theories on subsidy is somehow on a per project basis, we're going to be able to get innovation and lower costs. It's the idea that if we have one project, one site, somehow someone's going to figure out how to take a project pro forma, which is already stretched and optimized and difficult to finance because of costs overall. And that's somewhere in their budget, they're going to find a way to innovate on the project level. Innovating on the project level is not possible. We have to innovate on the dozens, hundreds, thousands of projects level. When we start to view it from those terms, then we can see patterns and opportunities. And that's all enabled by market commitment agreements, offtake agreements, et cetera. The systems integration, so connecting the workflows, is the enabler. So if you connect the dots between the different elements of the system and allow points of connectivity, in the early 2000s, there was this move towards service-oriented architecture, which was a different way of building software that allowed software in different locations to connect with each other securely and share messaging, essentially. How, databases, file servers, application servers, et cetera, could now talk across the internet. That then enabled the cloud. The cloud was built off of that sort of infrastructure innovation, where now you have essentially computing as a service that you can purchase on a per cycle basis or on a per transaction basis. All that was enabled because systems of different types began to talk to each other. We're at the very early stages of this happening across the housing delivery system, but we're not early. We're actually very late to this process. So in other industries, we've seen significant productivity gains as a result of connecting systems. When you connect the systems, now you have the ability to put on top of it a layer of AI orchestration. So what's the potential? Lower complexity, fewer variables, more standardization, integrated with regulatory reform, physical constraints are less prominent. And in each one of the stages, architecture, permitting, supply chain, construction scheduling, quality control, you have digit levels of efficiency potential. Who knows what the actual numbers will be? But if you just look at where some of the potential lies, there's no reason why we shouldn't be going after this with full energy, because this is where the benefits come from. So what are the stakeholder benefits? Federal government, provincial government, municipal builders, workers, the existing system benefits. The existing system does not suffer from these new innovations, bringing new systems integration, new AI orchestration, new products to the market. These are things that these groups benefit from. The industry benefits from it, but we need to invest in R&D. We need to start to invest in making these things happen. So what would happen if we had significant cost reduction? This to me is the most compelling aspect of this. If we look across housing unit production, business as usual, we're trying to make 1.2 million units, systems-based model, get it to 2.8. Can we create 420,000? New job creation, household wealth creation, subsidy, the efficiency per dollar of subsidy introduced to the housing market, GDP impact. $105 billion of GDP impact. This is viable. These are outcomes of cost reduction. The cost reduction generates economic growth. And this is the connection that we need to make. The investment in innovation focused on cost reduction generates GDP results. But it has to be balanced. This is an important caveat. We can't simply shift all of the subsidy dollars because we still need to build housing in the current system. So with today's need, subsidizing, filling financing gaps, building conventionally, there needs to be a balance. So the approach needs to be balanced. We need to determine how we can take some of the dollars, not all of the dollars, some of the dollars, and invest them in innovation while we still meet the current need. And that's going to be, a political art, is trying to figure out how this balance works in the right numbers. And so I'll just leave with this idea of, we want to build the system that builds Canada. So the courage to build differently. We know what doesn't work. Subsidizing broken systems, protecting the status quo, incremental improvements, it doesn't work. We've shown it. It's proven. What does work? Manufacturing learning curves, systems orchestration, creative destruction, integrated transformation. These things work. We've seen them work in other industries. They have significant cost reduction potential. And Canada can be the first to really get it right. Canada's well structured politically, economically, with $35 billion to invest. We can look at, okay, well, what's the federal government's role? What's the provincial government's role? What are municipal government's role? What's the private sector role? And you can really start to develop a plan that allocates more money into innovating, into product innovation, into scaling products that work, into AI orchestration, and really think about significant cost reduction over a 10-year period to the tune of 35% and massive economic growth as a result. So that's the presentation. I'm going to stop there for a moment. I think we still have some time for questions, and I'd love to hear any questions or thoughts from the audience, and I'll stop sharing.
Great, thanks, Aaron. That was good, and I think that probably has a lot of people in the audience thinking about a few different things. While we wait for folks to submit questions, we're going till 2 Atlantic, 1 Eastern time. So, and I have a couple slides to wrap up at the end. But while we're doing that, I guess I have a quick question. So, I guess I'm going to ask, and I don't know, this might be a difficult one for you to ask because I don't know how much you've looked into it, but Australia, I'm looking at their housing shortfall right now. I read somewhere they were saying they need 1.2 million homes by 2029. They're projected to have a 40% shortfall. They're blaming labor, high construction costs, and restrictive planning policies. The Kiwi Builds program that was announced in 2018 in New Zealand, they targeted 100,000 homes in 10 years, and to date have built just under 2,400 units. So I don't know if that's news to you or not, but what I'm bringing up is a lot of it is being blamed on the skilled labor force or lack of skilled labor, the high construction costs, and restrictive planning and regulatory policies. And when we do work at the research center, that's what we hear from everyone is that in the Canadian market, there's
every market.
In every market. So I guess what I'm getting to is how do we overcome that part of it? Like so I think I have a good idea what your answer will be, but that is like, maybe that's too short-sighted when we're thinking about changing a whole system. Like, what would you say is like, how are we overcoming the labor shortage, the material costs being so high, regulatory reform, everything like that?
Well, I mean, all of the problems that you identified and mentioned are integrated into a current housing delivery system. All of them have the same dynamics. So if you look at labor, you have a phenomenon in Australia, North America, where you have an aging construction workforce, and you don't have a new workforce that's coming in that is skilled and has been learning the trades and now can meet the coming need. My perspective is that problem is going to get much worse than people think, because you're going to have more people leaving the workforce, driving the costs further up. So we have to act now. All of the questions, the supply chain, the labor, all of those are predicated on a project by project site design, build, delivery process. If that's the mentality, you will not have any positive change. I just don't see how it happens. You have a process that has been in place for decades and decades and is as efficient as it'll ever be. How is it going to become more efficient to do site project by project work? We have to move as much of the production process as we can, as it evolves, into a product innovation framework. We need to be able to use assembly as a process. Construction from the ground up on a project by project basis has proven economics, and those will just continue. So absent a shift into more of a systems-based model where we're innovating product, there's competition to drive down costs, there's supply chain, labor, productivity, and cost on manufacturing are fundamentally different than construction. All of the issues that you mentioned are construction related. There's a lot of work to do to build out a manufacturing infrastructure that can actually flow into housing. But in that, there are a lot of jobs. And there's jobs, like I look at the folks at Models E in LA, they opened up I think it's about 160,000 square foot factory in Watts in LA. and they have people who otherwise would never have access to building housing. So because of just the process of assembly allows for folks who are, not, perhaps have disabilities, folks who are, it's a safer work environment. You're working with less strenuous conditions. You're out of the elements. It enables a workforce that's much broader. So I think all those issues play into most of the narrative that I was just going through. I was in Perth in May, and it's the same set of conditions. It's the same core issues as we're seeing here. These are not isolated, unique, different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that way. I was at a conference in April in Nova Scotia, and the keynote talked about, just the demographics of the populations internationally and how that's impacting all industries, and it's just exacerbated in the construction sector because of how we rely on skilled trades, essentially. I'm going to go to questions quick because we're going to run out of time, but so one person's asking about if you could comment on the role that BIM may play in our efforts to decrease construction costs. I actually thought about BIM as well when you were talking about investment in AI, and I wondered if, so one is the BIM component, but also just the lack of digital technology use in the construction sector. So the big players use it, but most of the sector isn't big companies, and they don't use it to its full extent. So what do you think the role is of BIM in decreasing construction costs?
I mean, I don't see how it works unless you have BIM. So if you take BIM out of the equation and then imagine the system that I just described, you have a giant hole. It's like, okay, well, because we work on this with customers who are developing new product and new manufacturing capabilities and all this. I mean, you start with product design. You start with product design, and whether that product is an assembly, a sub-assembly, an entire volumetric unit, a panelization system, any of them require a product development process, a prototyping process, and then a production environment process. Like, this is how you build product. And all of it requires, digital modeling. And any manufacturing, if you look at an advanced manufacturing process, it is stable. It's building the same thing over and over again, and it's led by high quality data from the start. And so the high quality data in our world of the built environment, I mean, that's you're starting from a high resolution, LOD 400, 450, whatever set of drawings that are in BIM, so that now they can be, used by other aspects of the process. So without BIM currently, I don't see it. The only issue is that some of the technologies they're too complicated for overall systems integration, so they need to be up-leveled and abstracted. For the architecture process, yes, I need to get into Revit and understand this level of build, and that flows into a manufacturing process. For the finance folks, that's less important. Regulatory, the resolution is less. There's all these different players and users within the system. They don't all need Revit licenses. In that process, the question is, what's the data? What's its purpose? Where is it in the process? What do I know about it? How can I start to orchestrate these different aspects of the system?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to go to one more question. I'm just going to combine them quickly. So one was around wondering if you have any suggestions on how do we create market commitments. A lot of industry here is calling it like we need sustainable demand to scale up which I think is tied to market commitment is the term that you're using. So how do we create market commitments for housing supply in a system that develops discrete projects was the question. And the other from a tool was how do we go from awareness of this approach to taking practical steps to advance towards that. So I think you can kind of combine the two, whereas a tool was looking at all of your recommendations, whereas CARE was looking at market commitments in particular.
Well, I think the first step is to accept that what we're doing now doesn't work, just flat out. And then second of all, to say, okay, do we think that this approach, this market commitment offtake, there's different phrases for it, works? We have a number of clients that were working on some of these structures. And the thing is, there's on the demand side, there's no question, right? It's similar to looking at how would you do an energy infrastructure deal, a power deal, right? So you're going into a region, you're going to say there's going to be 10,000 new homes in this region. They're going to need, power supply, so we need to invest in a power generation, right? They don't say, well, we can't build it until, the consumer's ready to buy power. There'd be no grids. Like there would be zero electrical lines. But they know that if they build the grid, the consumer will pay something per kilowatt hour, right?
Yeah.
And they have models of doing that, and they're pretty predictable. We know that people will rent or buy within a certain range in a cost basis. And we know that if we can get the build predictable and on par, and then you have different folks that are in the agreement. I need the folks in the factory to say that they're going to deliver some type of typology. Maybe it's single family, townhome, quadplexes, garden style apartments, 5 over, whatever the product is. I need you to build this product and deliver it at this price. Then I need some number of builders who are going to say, well, I've got 30 sites in this region, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to take these down, and these two together will get me to a price in the market that's this. In order to do that, I need a capital stack that includes debt, construction lending, equity, maybe some public investment, et cetera. But we're talking about 10,000 units, let's say, over a region, over a 5-year period of time. You can line up all the different players in that and have them commit. Everybody takes a little bit of risk because they're all somewhat depending on each other to get to stuff. Those agreements can exist, that offtake can exist, but that's where the market needs to go, because in the end, you're saying, will there be a need for the housing once it's in the market? That's what it depends on. It's similar to how they did, some of the pharmaceutical innovations that they've done, where they've said the government basically, the way that they did Warp Speed is they said, you get this thing to the market and the government will buy it. Mm-hmm. The government will buy it. And that's not what we're saying with housing, but we're saying that someone will rent it or someone will buy it, and this will be roughly the price. And working backwards from that, we can line up the commitment.
Yeah. And I mean, I was just thinking when you use the analogy of the electrical lines, like even in automotive, like the manufacturers in the automotive sector they know that there's going to be a buyer at the end, right?
They're not knocking on my door and telling me, do I want to buy a new RAV4?
Yeah, exactly.
Then they'll set up a factory.
Yeah, exactly. All right, there's a lot of questions that came in towards the end. I think we get a lot of people thinking. So what we're going to do for the folks in the audience is we're going to capture those questions, share them with Aaron. If he has time, he'll do his best to answer them, and we'll send that out over email. And then for folks to reach out to you, are you comfortable? Is LinkedIn the best approach, or
LinkedIn's good? Email Aaron@helixbuild.com. Happy to. I love anybody who's really interested in going after some of this stuff. And I think the timing is now. I mean, based on what we see in terms of the customers that we're talking to and viability of new models, I mean, the timing's now.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you, Aaron. I'm just going to wrap up with a couple slides. We have our next presentation happening in, I think the date changed recently, so we'll be in touch on the date, but I think it's early December. So it's with Greytech Stressoff and Metalinga, and it's from Design to Delivery, Digital Transformation in Canadian Offsite Construction. So looking forward to that. And then quickly for folks, architects, engineers, etc., who need to collect professional development hours, if you need a certificate for attending this, feel free to scan the QR code, fill out that form, and we'll get you a certificate confirming that you attended for your end of year PDHs. And with that, I want to thank our sponsors as well as Aaron. Aaron, thank you for your time today. It's a very timely discussion, and I think some folks were asking if we've talked to the federal government about some of the things that you mentioned today. We do, for the folks on the call, we do have a meeting with CMHC tomorrow. Aaron is joining us there, and hopefully Build Canada Homes as well. So thank you everyone for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good one.